A duplex receptacle can be used for the 1 horsepower Whirlpool tub. A single receptacle rated for 20 amps has a maximum load of 16 amps. This means that a 1 horsepower Whirlpool tub, which draws 20 amps, cannot be connected to a single receptacle. A duplex receptacle is rated for 20 amps, and the maximum load is 20 amps. This means that a 1 horsepower Whirlpool tub can be connected to a duplex receptacle. Section 110.3 requires that the Whirlpool tub have a dedicated circuit. This means that the circuit is used exclusively for the Whirlpool tub and no other loads. According to Section 210.23 ATWA, the total rating of utilization equipment fastened in place shall not exceed 50% of the branch circuit ampere rating where lighting unit, cord and plug connected utilization equipment not fastened in place, or both, are also supplied. Since the Whirlpool tub is rated for 20 amps, it cannot exceed 50% of the 20 amp branch circuit, which is 10 amps. However, the exception to this rule states that the total rating of utilization equipment fastened in place shall not exceed the branch circuit ampere rating where lighting unit, cord and plug connected utilization equipment not fastened in place, or both, are also supplied. Because the Whirlpool tub is the only load on the branch circuit, the exception applies and a duplex receptacle can be used. This means that the code allows the full 20 amp circuit to be used by a single piece of fastened equipment. This is on the condition that nothing else is connected to the circuit. It is important to remember that while you can use a duplex receptacle on the circuit, it is dedicated only to the Whirlpool tub. No other devices or appliances can be connected to the circuit at the same time. Exceeding the circuit's capacity can lead to overloads, trip breakers, and potentially dangerous situations. To summarize, firstly, ensure the circuit is a dedicated 20 amp circuit using 12/2 wiring. Secondly, a duplex receptacle is permitted in this situation, given the dedicated nature of the circuit. Thirdly, adhere to all relevant electrical codes and regulations for safe installation. Considering the electrical specifics, let's delve deeper into the reasons behind the code allowances and restrictions. Firstly, the National Electrical Code, or NEC, aims to ensure electrical safety by setting standards for installations. These standards are based on preventing fire hazards and electrical shock. Secondly, receptacles are rated for both their continuous current carrying capacity and their ability to handle short-term overloads. A 20 amp receptacle is designed to safely handle a continuous load of 20 amps, but can also withstand brief surges. Thirdly, a single receptacle is often limited to 80% of its rating to prevent overheating and ensure longevity. This explains the 16 amp limitation mentioned for a 20 amp single receptacle. In the case of the Whirlpool tub, the motor's operation is a key consideration. Motors often draw significantly higher current during startup than during continuous operation. This inrush current can briefly exceed the circuit's rated capacity. The code recognizes this and allows for it, within certain limits. Firstly, the dedicated circuit requirement is crucial because it prevents other loads from being added to the circuit, which could compound the problem during motor startup. Secondly, using a duplex receptacle does not inherently increase the circuit's capacity. It simply provides two connection points, both drawing from the same 20 amp circuit. Thirdly, the exception in Section 210.23 ATWA is specifically designed for situations where a single high-demand appliance is the only load on the circuit. This exception recognizes that the risk of overloading the circuit is low when there are no other simultaneous loads. Remember that the code is a minimum safety standard. While the code allows a duplex receptacle in this situation, it is always a good idea to consider additional safety measures. Firstly, using a ground fault circuit interrupter, or GFCI, receptacle is highly recommended for Whirlpool tub installations. Secondly, GFCIs protect against electrical shock by detecting ground faults and quickly interrupting the circuit. Thirdly, this is particularly important in wet environments like bathrooms. Furthermore, ensure that all wiring and connections are properly sized and installed. Firstly, loose connections can create resistance, leading to heat buildup and potential fire hazards. Secondly, using the correct wire gauge, typically 12 American wire gauge, or AUG, for a 20 amp circuit is essential for safe operation. Thirdly, consult with a qualified electrician if you are unsure about any aspect of the installation. Electrical work can be dangerous, and it is always best to err on the side of caution. Let's consider the potential consequences of not following the code. Firstly, overloading a circuit can cause the breaker to trip frequently. Secondly, this is not only inconvenient, but it can also damage the breaker over time, reducing its effectiveness. Thirdly, persistent overloads can also cause the wiring to overheat, potentially leading to a fire. Additionally, improper grounding or the absence of a GFCI can create a serious shock hazard, especially in wet locations. Firstly, water significantly increases the risk of electrical shock. Secondly, any electrical fault in a wet environment can be potentially lethal. Thirdly, that is why the code places such a strong emphasis on ground fault protection in bathrooms and other wet locations. So, while the code permits the use of a duplex receptacle for a 1 horsepower Whirlpool tub on a dedicated 20 amp circuit, it is crucial to understand the underlying principles and to follow all applicable safety guidelines. Firstly, always prioritize safety when working with electricity. Secondly, if you are not comfortable performing the work yourself, hire a qualified electrician. Thirdly, ensuring a safe and code-compliant installation will provide years of reliable and safe operation of the Whirlpool tub. Now, let's further break down the specific NEC sections to give a clear understanding of why the duplex receptacle is permissible in this scenario, with specific attention to the exception that applies. Firstly, section 210.21b2 focuses on the maximum cord and plug connected load to a receptacle. Secondly, it does indeed stipulate that a single 20 amp receptacle can only have a maximum load of 16 amps. Thirdly, the code recognizes that single receptacles are generally used for dedicated appliances, and this limitation prevents overloading in those cases. However, this section primarily addresses cord and plug connected loads. In the case of a hardwired Whirlpool tub, it has less direct relevance. Section 210.23 at WOW is more directly applicable, especially when considering the exception. Firstly, this section deals with utilization equipment fastened in place, which accurately describes a Whirlpool tub. Secondly, the general rule of 50% loading is intended to prevent overloading of the branch circuit when other loads are present. Thirdly, however, the exception explicitly states that this 50% limitation does not apply when the fastened-in-place equipment is the only load on the circuit. This is because, with no other loads present, the risk of overloading the circuit is significantly reduced. The exception is the key to understanding why the duplex receptacle is permissible. Firstly, it acknowledges that a dedicated circuit can handle a single high-demand appliance. Secondly, the duplex receptacle simply provides a means of connecting the appliance to that dedicated circuit. Thirdly, it does not change the circuit's overall capacity or increase the risk of overloading, as long as no other loads are connected. Consider the practical implications of this. Firstly, if the code required a single receptacle limited to 16 amps for a 20 amp Whirlpool tub, it would create unnecessary complications. Secondly, it would require either dirting the circuit, which is inefficient, or using a larger circuit than necessary. Thirdly, the exception to 210.23 ATWO provides a more practical and cost-effective solution, allowing the full capacity of the 20 amp circuit to be utilized by the Whirlpool tub. Furthermore, it's essential to understand that the dedicated circuit requirement is not merely a suggestion. Firstly, it is a mandatory safety provision. Secondly, a dedicated circuit ensures that the Whirlpool tub's power demands will not be compromised by other appliances or devices on the same circuit. Thirdly, this is particularly important because Whirlpool tubs often draw significant power during operation. To emphasize the importance of proper installation, let's consider some potential pitfalls. Firstly, using undersized wiring is a common mistake that can lead to overheating and fire hazards. Secondly, always use 12 American wire gauge or AWG wiring for a 20 amp circuit. Thirdly, ensure that all connections are tight and secure. Loose connections can create resistance, leading to heat buildup. Also, neglecting to install a ground fault circuit interrupter or GFCI is another serious oversight. Firstly, GFCIs provide critical protection against electrical shock. Secondly, They are especially important in wet locations like bathrooms. Thirdly, always install a GFCI receptacle or breaker for a Whirlpool tub circuit. And lastly, failing to properly ground the Whirlpool tub can also create a shock hazard. Firstly, ensure that the tub is properly grounded according to the manufacturer's instructions in local electrical codes. Secondly, a properly grounded tub provides a safe path for fault current to flow, minimizing the risk of electrical shock. Thirdly, if you're unsure about any aspect of the installation, consult with a qualified electrician. The NEC is a complex document, and it is important to have a thorough understanding of the code before undertaking any electrical work. Firstly, working with electricity can be dangerous. Secondly, it is always best to err on the side of caution. Thirdly, hire a qualified electrician if you are not comfortable performing the work yourself. In summary, the use of a duplex receptacle for a 1 horsepower Whirlpool tub on a dedicated 20 amp circuit is permissible under the NEC, provided that the exception to section 210.23 at WO is met and all other applicable codes and safety guidelines are followed.